Welcome to Briefing 2 of 6 of the CipherVibe Cybersecurity for Beginners course. Today we will make deepfake attacks on biometric identity providers understandable, practical, and connected to the rest of your learning path. Biometrics can help activate a device-bound authenticator, but a face, voice, or fingerprint is not a secret and cannot be rotated after exposure. Modern attacks combine stolen identity evidence, synthetic media, virtual cameras, device emulation, session manipulation, and social engineering against the recovery process. The purpose of this lesson is not to memorize a collection of terms. It is to build a mental model you can apply when tools, platforms, and threats change. We will define the core ideas, walk through a repeatable defensive workflow, examine mistakes that frequently mislead beginners, design useful safeguards, and finish with a safe portfolio exercise. Throughout the course, remember that security work begins with authorization, scope, and evidence. Use the exercises only on local systems you own or environments you have explicit written permission to assess. Pause when you need to. Write concepts in your own words, record observations, and distinguish what the evidence proves from what you are merely assuming. That habit is more valuable than rushing through another tool demonstration. Start with 4 concepts that provide the vocabulary for deepfake attacks on biometric identity providers. First, NIST treats biometrics as an activation factor used with a physical authenticator, not as a standalone remote authenticator. Second, phishing resistance comes from cryptographic binding to the verifier and authenticated channel. Manually entered one-time codes are not phishing resistant. Third, presentation attack detection examines artifacts shown to a sensor, while injection defenses detect virtual cameras, emulators, tampered clients, replayed media, and manipulated data paths. Fourth, identity proofing and account recovery are lifecycle controls, so a strong login can still be bypassed through weak enrollment or help desk procedures. Do not study these as isolated definitions. Ask which asset or business service is involved, where the relevant trust boundary sits, which identity performs the action, and what reliable evidence would show that the control worked. Security reasoning is a chain. Source evidence supports an observation. The observation supports a conclusion. The conclusion informs a proportionate decision. The decision has an owner, an expected result, and a way to verify it. When any link is missing, say so. A professional explanation can include uncertainty without becoming vague. For example, a network record may prove that 2 addresses communicated, but it may not prove which human initiated the action or whether the content was malicious. Use diagrams whenever a relationship is difficult to explain in a sentence. Mark identities, systems, data flows, boundaries, and controls. A simple, accurate diagram is more useful than a crowded picture that implies knowledge you do not have. Now turn the mental model into a repeatable workflow. First, the attacker gathers identity documents, breach data, public images, voice samples, and contextual answers used by support teams. Second, synthetic media or replayed capture is injected through a virtual camera, modified application, emulator, or compromised endpoint rather than presented naturally to a trusted sensor. Third, the proofing provider evaluates document authenticity, biometric comparison, liveness, device integrity, network risk, and behavioral consistency. Fourth, a successful enrollment creates a new authenticator or recovery path that appears legitimate to downstream applications and federation partners. Fifth, detection requires correlated signals across proofing, device, session, help desk, identity provider, and relying party logs, not a biometric score in isolation. Before acting, define the objective, scope, owner, and success condition. Collect the smallest amount of trustworthy evidence needed to understand the situation. Preserve timestamps and sources so another person can follow your reasoning. Priorities should be explainable. Consider exposure, identity and privilege, sensitive data, business importance, exploit conditions, existing safeguards, reversibility, and confidence. A dramatic label should never replace that analysis. The workflow does not end when a command succeeds, a ticket closes, or a dashboard turns green. Verify the new state with fresh evidence. Check for recurrence and for side effects introduced by the change. Document the result in plain language: what you observed, what you concluded, what you changed, who approved it, what evidence confirms the outcome, and what uncertainty remains. This disciplined loop, observe, interpret, decide, act, verify, and learn, appears in every cybersecurity specialty. Understanding failure modes will protect you from attractive but unreliable shortcuts. First, assuming liveness detection alone defeats deepfakes ignores injection attacks that bypass or manipulate the capture channel. Second, using a high face match score as proof of a live legitimate person confuses similarity with provenance and intent. Third, weak recovery lets an attacker replace a strong passkey or device-bound credential with a newly enrolled factor. Fourth, overly aggressive fraud models can exclude legitimate users, create accessibility problems, and drive risky manual overrides. Fifth, retaining biometric samples without strict minimization, encryption, separation, and deletion creates irreversible privacy and breach impact. These mistakes often share one cause: confusing an available signal with a complete explanation. A tool can report a finding, a successful action, or a score while important scope, context, ownership, and verification remain missing. Avoid absolute claims. Words such as secure, compromised, fixed, and compliant require scope and evidence. Prefer precise statements such as, "This control blocked the tested path under these conditions," or "The available records show this identity used the service," but do not identify the human operator. Also resist copying commands without understanding their inputs, outputs, permissions, and side effects. Run one controlled change at a time and record what happened. If an exercise does not behave as expected, that is useful evidence. Stop, inspect the environment, revise the hypothesis, and explain the difference. Good security work is not a performance of certainty, it is careful reasoning under imperfect information. Reliable security uses layers because no single control can prevent every failure. First, bind proofing to a trusted capture path and detect virtual cameras, emulators, rooted devices, tampered clients, replay, and media injection. Second, combine document validation, presentation attack detection, device intelligence, behavioral signals, rate limits, and trained human review for high-risk cases. Third, issue phishing-resistant device-bound authenticators after proofing and require equivalent assurance for recovery and factor replacement. Fourth, notify users through independent channels when enrollment, recovery, or biometric settings change, with rapid revocation and dispute paths. Fifth, minimize biometric retention, separate templates from identity records, protect processing keys, test demographic performance, and audit vendor claims. For each important risk, ask 5 questions. What makes the event less likely? What evidence would reveal it? Who can contain it? How will trustworthy operation be restored? Who owns the decision and accepts remaining risk? Least privilege applies to people, applications, devices, automation, data stores, and administrators. Access should be scoped, separated, monitored, reviewed, and removed when it is no longer needed. Every important control needs a test strategy. Include representative normal activity, negative cases, misuse, dependency failure, and rollback. A written policy is not evidence that a technical or operational control works. Design for humans. A safeguard that is impossible to use correctly will be bypassed. Provide safe defaults, understandable messages, usable recovery, and clear escalation. Finally, preserve the evidence trail from observation through decision, action, and verification. That history supports investigations, audits, lessons learned, and honest measurement. Turn this briefing into an action plan. First, map every enrollment, recovery, and help desk path that can create or replace an authenticator. Second, test providers with authorized replay, virtual camera, emulator, injection, and synthetic media scenarios. Third, require cryptographic device binding and phishing-resistant authentication after identity proofing. Fourth, correlate proofing events with identity provider, device, fraud, and application telemetry. Fifth, run accessibility, privacy, bias, incident recovery, and vendor exit reviews before scaling. Make the work measurable. Useful indicators for this topic include high-risk proofing flows covered, injection scenarios detected, recovery paths at equivalent assurance, fraud review precision, and biometric retention exceptions. Define the owner, source, review frequency, and limitation for every measure. Do not treat a product purchase or a single patch as completion. Retest the end-to-end trust path, preserve evidence, and track exceptions until the risk is demonstrably reduced. The broader lesson is that modern security failures cross layers: identity, software, infrastructure, hardware, operations, and governance. Defenders need an architecture that remains trustworthy when one layer fails. For the primary source links and chapter markers, open the description. For more evidence-based cybersecurity research, visit CipherVibe.com/news and subscribe to CipherVibe. CipherVibe is operated by CloudSecTech LLC. Copyright 2026. All rights reserved. This briefing is general education. Never test a system without explicit written authorization.